Welcome to the Real Estate Power Play Podcast, your launch pad for skyrocketing success in real estate investing. I'm your host, Gabe Rodarte, alongside Mark Monroe. We're ready to bring you transformative stories, groundbreaking strategies, and the insider secrets of real estate giants. Get ready to accelerate your investment journey and become a true power player in the world of real estate. Hey guys, what's happening? Welcome to the Real Estate Power Play Podcast. My name is Gabe Rodarte, and I have today my good buddy, Darren Smith. Darren, what's happening?
It's great to be here, Dave. Having a great day.
Good. So, look, guys, what we want to do is, it's just a blessing to have Darren here. We've been good buddies for quite a bit of time. We are just talking right before the show and sharing. What's that?
Yeah, 2 years now. Hard to believe.
2 years. Yeah, 2 years. So we've grown together in the commercial space, and this is really cool to have him on here because we're going to do some recapping of things that we've done, some creative finance stuff. So if you're listening to this podcast and you really enjoy it, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and we'll be able to just get more people on like Darren. And then also, if you guys need any other help, let us know. We're happy to help you out. Let's jump in to the show. Darren, here we go. You have been doing this real estate gig for how long?
Gabe, I've been doing real estate, got into the single family world back in 2003 when I left the service. And 6.5 years ago was when I made my official transition over to the commercial space. So I was doing it on and off, all sorts of levels throughout each of those careers, so the residential and then now in the industrial space.
Wow. So, man, I didn't realize it was that long. So you were doing residential for quite a while, and then you moved over to commercial 6 years ago?
That's right. I wish I would have done it sooner. I like most people, in the 2000s made some decent money through the 2000s and then got absolutely crushed when the market crashed in that 08-09 cycle. You name a mistake that you can make, over leveraging, over expanding, growing outside of my territory, trying to do stuff remotely, managing things. I did it all. Fortunately, I was also through the service. I was in the service after high school, and so got some pretty good credentials and a career out of that doing computer stuff. So that was able to kind of keep me afloat. But always kind of had that bug and was always dabbling my toe in the real estate world through most of that time until, like I said, about 6 years ago, I had some friends that were in commercial space. I met them through a friend of mine was friends with people in the commercial academy that we're both members of. And I just saw what they were doing. And I saw how hard I was working in the commercial space. I had a bunch of employees. We were doing high volume, tons of marketing, spending, 30, 40,000 a month on marketing. And it was one of those things where I saw the other side. I saw what it could be. And I thought that's where I want to be. So moved back to Pennsylvania 6.5 years ago. And basically, I won't say cold turkey because I was still running the other company for a couple of years at the same time. But everything I did here in Pennsylvania has been commercial. And I'm very happy I made that change.
Wow, man, that's exciting. So for those who are listening, that's probably where a lot of people are, especially in this market cycle that we're in now. In September 2024. What is something that happened like between like this interim? So it wasn't that you're riding the fence, you're really burning the candle at both ends for a time period while you're getting the commercial stuff up and going, right?
Absolutely. And I would recommend that to anybody. In fact, when I got laid off from my computer job just over 8 years ago, the last job that I had, and I could have gone back and got a job the next day. I had a master's, I had every certification you could imagine. But I was doing the real estate thing. I was in houses. I'd built up a company. I was making good money. And I thought, you know what? I got this. And I just kind of I burned the bridges, as you say. And if I would have gone back and got another job and built up that reserve and allowed myself to not use any of my real estate proceeds during that time, I would have built a lot faster. It would have made it much easier on my, my family, on the finances, on everything. So it was a hard transition for a couple of years there until I got the residential business up and going. And so I didn't want to do the same thing when I went to commercial. My residential business was going well. We were flipping, wholesaling, over 50 houses a year towards the end there. And I kept that going, but I had enough people in place to kind of run that and do well enough with it that it then allowed me to not use that, or actually use some of those proceeds to get into the commercial space. But as we'll talk about, I kind of realized that I was never going to make enough money in residential to allow me to do what I want to do in commercial. So I had to start using some of those creative finance skills that I learned in the residential space and applied them over the commercial, and then grew those from there.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue. I think that people look at commercial and they see the big dollar signs and they're like, I'm out, or they see a big, due diligence period, and then you're dropping thousands of dollars and you're doing all these other things. And they're like, well, I got to do that. And I also got to acquire. And this is not the same thing as residential. What is this? It's longer than 30-day option period. Like, what's going on here? What is this going hard? The money went hard. What does that mean? All these different things kind of gets overwhelmed. They go, you know what? Let me just take a pause for it for a second. And so one of the things that I've noticed that's been a blessing is the fact that we can use creative financing strategies, and you're really good at it. And definitely want to dig into some of the things that you've done, because you've helped me process through some of these, of saying, okay, let's look at some creative financing, and that allows opportunities for us to acquire bigger properties and bigger assets.
Yeah, it really does. Because by the time, you think of saving even money for a down payment on a house that, now houses are a couple $100,000. You
Right.
need tens of thousands, or, maybe 1 or 200,000 if you're going to flip it and put all that money into those. So when you commercial, you're basically, sometimes you're adding a zero to that number, or two, depending,
Right.
as you can scale, which is one of the best things about commercial. You can really scale it almost infinitely. But the range I like to play in is really the 1 million to $10 million properties is where I focus, and I've had some success. But I look at the first commercial property that I bought was 1.65 million. And there's no way I would have been able to come up with a 20 or 30% down at that period. Uh, maybe I could have scrabbled it together, but it would have been really challenging. And
Right.
so what I was able to do was use creative financing and have the seller hold a second note, a second mortgage on the property after the bank. So in that exact deal, that was back when money was a little bit more free flowing. But what I had was the seller, or the bank, did a 70% mortgage at 4% interest, I believe. And then
Wow.
the seller did a 30% second. And so I 100% financed that property. So at the closing table, I bought a $1.65 million property for, I think it was about $17,000 out of pocket day of closing. And
Wow.
that was it. And now there were some other issues with that. I didn't end up getting rent on that property for about 7 months, because it was rented to the Army Corps of Engineers. And so by the time they were done, they owed me, it was over, I think it was like $90,000. They did pay me. The government really always pays, but I had to float that during that time. So there was some out of costs, which I
Right.
was like,
Okay.
man, this commercial thing's scary. Like, did I screw up? Is
Yeah.
something, was this a good choice? I'll cut to the end of that property. I sold it about 3 years after I bought it, and my total net profit on that first property was $750,000 in a property that my total out
Nice.
of pocket, like I said, was about less than 20 grand.
So that's 250 a year you broke away with, basically. And with that, how much work did you really have to put towards that, compared to coming from residential, break it away with 250 in residential space compared to commercial, and you're going, this is like freaking amazing. This is a no-brainer. And you saw that coming as you acquired, I can imagine, as you did the underwriting. But when
Ah,
you're doing that, where you're just like, this is like a no-brainer.
well, I'm gonna be perfectly honest. I see so many pro forma analyses of properties out there where people say, "Hey, I'm going to do this, and then it's going to be worth this, and this is going to be my exit." And we all have ideas, but honestly, we don't know. I mean, we're making best guesses on what the market's going to do, what we're going to run into, what's going to happen with the tenant. That property right there, I really, I had sorry about that. I had gone into that thinking my net income on it was going to be about maybe 70,000 a year, and that was cash flow
Wow.
and principal pay down. So even those numbers right there, you think I'm putting in $20,000, I'm going to make $70,000 a year. That's a win in my book all day long. Even if I held that property forever and never did anything.
Right. That's
I
good.
sold it because the location was a little bit more risky. I went through a excruciatingly frustrating renegotiation with the tenant, the Army Corps that was in it. It was yeah, just not good. Bottom line, dealing with them is excruciating. And so once I got that done, I got the new lease in place. I increased the income of the property. cap rates were still fairly stable, and I have a pretty big buyer's list. And I just kind of started making some calls and said, I want to get rid of this thing and take an exit. So I didn't realize it was going to be 250 a year. That's what it ended up being down the road. But that's just because everything was going up at that time, and I was happy with even my original numbers going in.
Wow, that's amazing. That's the so that's the start. So this is the start of the Darren Smith journey of commercial real estate. And what's interesting is that it's like you just jumped into it and said, you know what, would you be happy to seller finance this thing, or would you be interested in it? And that is not a skill that's found right away, right? So you learned this in residential space, I'm guessing, seller financing and, taking over debt and whatever. How many times have you used that type of strategy where it's not just a straight bank loan on an asset?
Yeah, probably, if you go back to the residential space, I've done that dozens of times back then. On commercial properties, I probably have probably about 6 or 7 of the ones that I've purchased have either been partial or majority seller financing on them. And I have 3 I'm working on right now, and 2 of those 3 have a big portion of the properties being held as seller financing.
Got it. And that's so interesting to hear. Well, why don't we go over the asset class that you chose? Because a lot of people run into, and just us and the broker side and stuff that we do also is we just hear so much about asset class, and there's more than just multifamily. And whenever I talk with friends that are maybe from residential space or in the commercial space and say, hey, what are you doing? Well, I need to pick up more commercial. Immediately I have to ask what type, because people think that just means multifamily. Well, I need to do more commercial. What does that mean? Well, I just want more multifamily properties. Okay, well, kinda. There's a lot of different asset classes. How did you end up here? And I believe it's industrial. Why don't we dive in a little bit more so that way people get to know more about what you're looking for? If they're in your area, they can send you some stuff. But why this class, and why do you like it so much?
Yeah, it's a great question, because when you're making that transition from residential, it's scary because you feel like you know nothing. And I guess what I'd like your listeners to understand is, if you've bought houses and you've flipped houses and you've negotiated and talked with sellers, you've sat in the living room across from people, learned about their lives, had those hard conversations, that's, I'll say, 75% of what you need to know. Everything after that is just the technicalities of the asset class itself. And don't get me wrong, there's many things you need to know in commercial, but you've done the hard things of like talking with people, putting out budgets, doing rehabs. Now it's just scaling that up and kind of learning the new lingo that it takes. And so what led me to the industrial space was, when I was making that transition, one, I saw how hard multifamily was. I mean, I'd had a bunch of rentals, and so I knew that was a big pain in the butt dealing with people. But then the people that were switching over to the multifamily, I was looking at the structures they had to put in place to make these deals work. They had to do huge syndications where they were having, at least several, if not dozens of people putting money into them, because the cap rates were so compressed at that time. This was 6, 7 years ago. And honestly, they still, they're loosening a lip, but they still kind of are. So when I was looking at, hey, my bank money, we'll go back 6 years, was, 5%, my cap rate 6%. That's 100 basis point spread, 1%, in interest, so to speak. And I looked at the industrial space, and I looked at the others as well, but in the industrial space, the cap rates were on average about 200 basis points higher. So if my money is at 5%, my cap rate's at 8%. And again, these are averages, and we're looking at blanket and different types of assets within the asset class. You can have class A, B, C, and locations and all that vary. But bottom line was, I had automatically the spread built into it. That was the number one thing. The number two was just the competition. Obviously there's higher cap rates. It really just meant less people were going after that. It's very easy to say, hey, I have 10 rentals. Now I'm going to go buy a 20 unit rental property or 50 unit. Right. You can translate that in your mind very easily. Yeah. Going to, my first property was a 23,000 square foot single tenant warehouse. That's scary. Your tenant moves out, like what happens? And so just the number, when you walk into somebody's office or somebody's home, there wasn't a stack of letters or yellow cards sitting on their desk. They may have gotten a couple a year. And so it was a very different conversation talking with those people. And then the third thing was, I just felt it was simple. I didn't have to put together a huge syndication and learn all those things. I didn't have to understand an asset class of managing these, crazy big assets and all the things that go into that, and having 100 toilets. It's one building, it's 4 walls. There's some office space. And so when something goes out, it's mostly open air. And so just the maintenance on them was so much easier. And then along the maintenance part, a lot of these buildings, I can think of several, but they're triple net. So either I have a manager who's in that area that like takes care of everything. So I literally don't ever get a phone call, or the tenant takes care of everything. And I had a building, I've since sold it, but I was responsible for the roof and the structural beams and the floor. I literally never got a call the entire time I owned that building. There was a leak in the roof the one
Wow.
time, and the person in the tenant in the building, there was a property manager there. He had it fixed, and then they just emailed me the bill, and I paid the $600 bill for it. That was my management on a building that was, grossing over $400,000 a year. How many phone calls would you get, and how many houses do you have to have, and then how many phone calls you're going to get in a year to manage $400,000 of gross income? It's a lot.
It is a lot. Wow, man. That's a really cool story. Um, yeah, so industrial. And so you also do mainly single tenant or not a lot of multi-tenant that you run across, right? You're doing some of the bigger buildings, that's stuff that you would see that people go, oh my gosh, it's a little bit scary, to be honest with you. Some of the stuff I've seen of your stuff, you're like, this is the kind I like, and I'm good at it.
Yes, and it's not, I won't say it more happened to me that I kept getting all these single tenant net leases in these buildings where there's just one tenant in them. I was looking for the multifamily stuff, but honestly, it's hard to find, especially like smaller bay industrial. I know some people really specialize in that where the tenants are, 1 to 5,000 square feet, those types of things. The cap rates on those honestly were more in line with the multifamily because it was like people could go to single family to multifamily, single family to self storage, and then like I think that segued into these small because hey, I have 5 tenants, I have 10 tenants. It spreads the risk out a little bit. So no, I like these buildings. They work great. I diversify my risk in a couple of ways. I make sure you're vetting the tenant that's in the building. Their credit worthiness obviously is a huge impact on that. That building I just referenced, that one was a national credit tenant that was in that building, and they had 7 years of term left on their lease. So if they left,
Wow.
it was a subsidiary of Toyota Motor Corp. They were going to pay their lease. I wasn't going to be left with nothing. The other thing I look at is how easy is it to re-rent this building? Is it in a good location? Does it have amenities that suit people? Is it able maybe to be demised? That was a 48,000 square foot building. At one point, that building had 4 tenants in it. So I knew, hey, I could go back if I needed to and put 4 tenants in this building. You can mix it up versus just, hey, I have to find someone that can only fit this exact box. Allows you to diversify the risk a little bit that way as well. And then I just do it across a portfolio. So I have sold a couple assets in the last year and gone to cash a bit with the hope of being able to buy some more, which has not happened near as easily as I thought it. I
Yeah.
thought it would. But when you own multiple properties, if you can have enough reserves across a portfolio, then you don't mind the risk of taking on bigger and bigger single point of failures in those because you can cover them with other assets that you have.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so one thing that we went over is the triple net aspect, the part where they take care of the tenant is taking care of the building, and then also just how many tenants that you're looking at and the way to look at these assets. And your underwriting is pretty fast now. I mean, you get through them pretty quick on anything, and you already know if you haven't already seen some of these properties. And you're just going through it. I liked what you said about also what type of other, like we would call it in the day. I think that the hurdle is the exit strategy, right? Like, what are you going to do with the property if, whenever so-and-so moves out, or the owner, the seller, the tenant? Um, that's also something that's huge here that you're mentioning, of saying, hey, look, if this tenant moves out, they like it because they have this bay, or the drive is set up this way, or they really don't need that much parking, and that's fine for them. But if they move out, I'm going to need another 5 or 10 spaces of parking just to make this really work,
Mhm.
or something like that. And so that's part of your underwriting, right?
It absolutely is. You really have to vet, from a macro perspective of the whole area. What's the geography? What's going on in that market? What's the job base? And then you just narrow it in more and more. Like how close is the building to a highway? Is it close to other industrial that's going on? And then when you get down to the actual property, you hit the nail on the head. Parking is a huge thing.
I didn't realize how big it was. We're working on this industrial. It's actually a retail office flex industrial. It does have an industrial aspect of it, but not like yours.
Mhm.
Small bay stuff. But man, this whole street has like 2 parking spots per thousand. And then we're at 4.5. And I'm like, just that alone puts this property in a whole different category. Those 2 extra spots you would never guess. But everything else only has two, maybe two. They're like, hey, yeah, this one has 2.2. You talk to a broker, and I'm just going, that's it. Like, what happens to the second story? Like, how does it people even get up to the office space? And where do they park for that? And so the street's getting redone and everything, which is going to cause less parking because people would kind of park on that shoulder a little bit. And so it was just all up and down the street. And we're working on this new thing that's very fun, but my eyes are totally alert. And I've known from you, I've known from other people within our other groups in our masterminds of like, hey, look, keep an eye on the parking because this is key. It's almost every phone call.
Mhm.
Right? Every single phone call is going, okay, great, industrial. You got 20,000 square feet. Well, how much parking do you have?
Yep.
Like right away, it's a big deal. So, um, so let's go there because what are some things that you found to kind of like pivot a little bit? What are some things that you found that are really big things, but you didn't know they were that important before? Like what is like an aha that you're like, this is super important and I didn't know that.
Yeah. Came with some great questions, Gabe, for sure. The parking was absolutely a huge one. We already went into that. A building I'm about to be buying, it's 40,000 acres on almost, I'm sorry, 40,000 square feet on almost 6 acres. I could literally fit a whole nother 40,000 on that.
Wow.
So that means there's a ton of parking, kind of gated. And so when you're looking at what the triple net rate is, let's say in that area, it goes for $8 a square foot, roughly, maybe 9. I could probably get at least another buck or two per square foot on the building because I have so much additional parking. So it's,
Wow.
and even if maybe you don't get more for the building, you're going to rent faster just because it's going to be so desirable.
Better tenant.
Yeah, a better tenant.
Got it.
You're going to find people that are good. The tenants are going to love that because they're going to say, "Hey, look at all this extra parking." If you have someone that has a maybe not a trucking company or on a property that size, but they're a repair company. Maybe they do rigging or HVAC. You could park 50 trucks on that parking lot, no problem, and it'd be easy. Versus you have that same building, you could fit 40,000 square feet on 3 acres or 2.5. And boy, you would be crammed and tight. And it's a whole different story when you're getting tenants in. So what I look for, things that are I think very important is anytime I hear someone say, "Oh, this is unique" or "This is special," I always kind of like those raise red flags for me. Anytime something is odd about a building, just like a house, oh, it's one of a kind. One of a kind, I don't want. I'm not doing that flip because you have to find the
Yeah.
perfect tenant to fit that one of a kind house that has, I don't know, a crystal chandelier gazebo in hot pink. I don't know,
Right.
you name it.
Right.
So I'll hear people say, well, one, limited parking. That's a huge thing. Two, another thing I really don't like is when trucks are not able to easily get into a parking lot and then back up to a loading dock, or if they can back up to a loading dock and they're sticking out onto a street or they're blocking the entrance, that kind of thing. Cars can't get by. And by the way, I realize when you're in cities, sometimes these conversations change, and that is just the norm
Right.
when you go into like CBD areas, central business district. But for the stuff I do, that's a big negative for sure. The other thing is the slope of the parking lot. I was talking with someone about a building, and they had a drive-in ramp to get into the building, but it was like at a pretty significant angle. And I'm thinking, if you're driving a work truck and you're loaded up with 2x4s, and all of a sudden you pull out of your parking lot or you back out, and all of a sudden everything slides out of your truck, you're going to have a very unhappy tenant. They're not going to stay there. So anything like that. Layout of the building too, when you get into older properties, they can be broken up into lots of weird ways where the floors go up and down. Sometimes that's okay. Like you can have that work if you can have access from all the sides and you can get to them. But I've been to those types of buildings where it's kind of a maze going back because it's been built over, phases, but you can only access it from one side or maybe get around the side a little bit. So that's not a building you can split up into different tenants and to deal with the different heights of floors or the fact that everything's kind of maybe pigeonholed through different areas. So those are just some of the red flags that I look at. Obviously, when you can get into buildings, the condition of the building, the roof, how much power does it have? The age of the HVAC systems, the condition of the parking lot. You get into water retention issues, with things getting washed away. I've put in 2 different buildings where I've put in, I forget what they call them, but it's basically you go in and you cut into the dirt and put in big rocks to make it so the water drains away from the building better
Wow.
because it's getting
Like a
washed
French
away.
drain
So
type deal?
kind of French drain. There's another name for it. I'm blanking
Wow.
on it. But bottom line is just, water drainage because you're getting these big open areas and you have huge roofs. So when the water's coming off the roof,
Right.
it can really have a big impact. And then the other thing I like about the space is well, you say we were talking about parking earlier. I'm very close. I'm buying a truck parking lot. It literally it's just a parking lot,
I like
and
it.
I'm really excited about the space. I've learned so much just in the last 6 weeks, and so I only bring that up to say, one, how important parking is, but two, I'm always learning. You don't think you have to know everything, right away. I've only been in this space 6 years, but every time something new comes up, I'm like, okay, what's this area? Or hey, what is how does that benefit the property, or maybe make it worse? Or truck parking. I've hung out at more truck stops, talked to more truck parker truckers. I'm just hanging out like, hey, I'm looking at parking my, parking trucks around here. You just have these conversations. So if you maybe that's what everything comes back to. Why I think, the people that's listening to this podcast, if they're buying houses, if they're talking with owners, why they can make that jump is
Right.
if you can have those uncomfortable conversations, if you can manage a budget, if you can talk to people, negotiate, if you have a desire to learn and explore and work with people, then you absolutely can do this. It's the exact same thing that they're doing right now.
Man, that is super cool. So you have so what's up with the truck parking? I gotta ask, dude, because I got a philosophy about this but it has nothing to do with truck parking. Go ahead. Yeah, I'm on. So,
I don't have a philosophy on it. I just know, holy cow, truck parking is it's big. I would say it's not as sophisticated. Like everything I get into, I like getting into when things aren't done. I think when there's ways to add value and improve on them. So a couple things I've learned is massive difference between mom and pop truck rental company where maybe they have 5 to 50 spots or something. It's a gravel lot. Maybe they have their
right.
business and they have an extra parking lot in the back. Those rates are half or less of what you get if you have a big, couple hundred space, professionally managed, run, fenced, lighted, security cameraed lot. And those are, starting at 180, and going up from there, 250s, nothing in this area, or, pretty easy to achieve. And you get into obviously some big cities in Jersey. I mean, it can be multiple times that.
Wow.
That's the first thing I've learned. The second is the there is definitely like some big companies or some big boys that participate in this. But on the other hand, I don't know how the truckers do it because I've like when I look around and try and find truck parking and I've downloaded on the apps, I've subscribed to them, I pay for them, and it'll show you like where gas stations are. It'll show you where like a Walmart parking lot is. But
Right.
finding like actual truck parking lots for these truckers to go, it's very challenging. It's not it's just it's not the sophistication that you get if you want to go rent someplace. You can go to Zillow or apartments.com or whatever it is.
Right.
It's almost a commodity at this point, and truck parking, is not that case. And then I guess the last thing I've learned is when you get into the bigger, more professionally run stuff, you're not even dealing with truckers anymore. You're dealing with big companies. So that's my strategy on this one is to go talk with big companies who have hundreds or thousands of trucks around the
Right.
nation, and then you rent to them many spots at once, not on the hourly. And that's a whole other conversation. You can rent hourly, daily, monthly, yearly. I mean, there's all sorts of terms, and the prices can change dramatically for that. But also the amount of work that you have to put in and the risk and the management can change dramatically as well.
Wow, man. So I love this whole thing. Here's an aspect of parking that is kind of goes into what I was saying. So I've been telling people about, hey, stay in the path of progress. I think we had a mastermind call the other day about, hey, are you in the path of progress of what we're doing? Right. And so, we have this commercial brokerage now that we're growing, or the broker team at least, and we're building that out even bigger than what it is now. And it's in the path of progress of the rest of our businesses that we have. And so a parking lot is so interesting because it's naturally in the path of progress, because even if it's somewhere off the beaten path, it's a land play, it's a covered land play. You're getting rents off of it, it's cash flowing, you're doing stuff. And eventually, just like everything else in real estate, things move in that direction at some point, right? And so do you look at that at some point and go, you know what, over time, this might be 5 or 10 years from now, but this thing eventually business is moving in that direction? Or maybe it's something that there's already business around it.
Uh, I I love the idea of covered land plays, and I hear people talk about them a lot on why they're buying properties. I'll be honest, I've always been, I guess I'm newer at this. And so for me, the next couple of years is really as far out as I project most of the deals that I'm doing.
You're
And
like
I'm just being
cash flow.
perfectly honest. Like I maybe in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, this is a great area and it's growing and someday, be able to do something else with it. But I've never done a ground up development. So I've done some significant rehabs, but I've never started from scratch. That's excruciating, especially in Pennsylvania where I live. Oh my gosh, the zoning, permitting, all that is
Right.
just it's an absolute nightmare to get anything done. I know people literally leaving the state just because they're like, I can't develop here anymore. I gotta head somewhere
Awesome.
where I can actually get stuff done and work with the government. But anyway, that's a tangent. Sorry about that. But the really answer is no. I don't when I'm doing my performas, when I'm running numbers and everything else. Yeah, I'll look out how long's the lease. So that one I told you I had a 7-year lease, that makes me feel better. I'll look that far out, but not that I was going to redevelop it later on. But hey, if it happens and I get
How much
that
land
win,
is the storage? I mean the truck parking.
the one I'm looking at, it's actually 2 lots on opposite side of the road. It's just shy of 19 acres that I'm looking at right now.
Nice. Wow, that's cool. Two
Yeah.
lots on opposite sides of the road. That's really cool.
Yes,
Yeah.
and you don't. The other thing I was thinking when I first got into this was you had to be like right off the highway because that's where you see a lot of truck parking spots. But really, that's more the gas station service center type model. It really matters there. If you have a nice lot, you can be several miles off the highway, and it really has almost zero impact on
Yeah.
your ability to lease the
Yeah, we're
spaces.
talking about drivers that are used to driving all the time.
Mhm.
This is normal. So a
Mhm.
couple miles is not that big of a difference.
Yeah. At least if you don't have to go through a residential or like a ton of traffic lights or like hard corners, that
Yeah.
can definitely impact you. But if you have, if it takes some extra 5 minutes to get off the highway, it doesn't matter at all.
Yeah. Wow, man, that's awesome. So, dude, I just appreciate you. I do so much with the call last week that we had this
Mhm.
mastermind. Um, Guys, if you want to know more or if you're in, why don't you just tell a little bit about your area, your buy box, what you're doing, and then, if someone wants to connect with you.
Absolutely. Anybody, if they're looking just to, you know, bounce some ideas off me, if they're learning and kind of want some tips, I'm always happy to talk and share. I get way more from other people and they've done this for me for years. So have always happy to do the same. I live in South Central Pennsylvania and I basically buy anywhere in South Central Pennsylvania all the way over to Philly. And I'll go out for nicer properties or ones that are worth my time. I'll go into Jersey, Delaware, and then Maryland for sure. My email is Darren, Darren at solidgrowthproperties.com. And I basically buy anything industrial, 10,000 square feet and up, I'll say, but sometimes smaller deals are great. And that 20 to 60,000 is what I absolutely love. And I'll buy, I mean, people, one of the questions I get from owners a lot, I'll finish with this because I'm sure they get it in houses as well. Hey, I mean, I'm not, owner will call you up and say, oh, I'm not desperate. I don't need to sell, and you're like, hey, I totally get it. Like I'm
Right.
not looking for desperate. I truly can. I've done this several times. I can pay full value for buildings. I mean, I told you that deal I did earlier.
Right.
That was full value for that property, that 1.625 million that I paid for that. Um,
Wow.
and so you can make deals work. You can make numbers work and make it work really well for the seller. And it doesn't have to be you're going in and someone who's desperate. Most of the people you talk to in commercial, I'll say what I love about it is I'm not going in and taking a terrible situation to try and like save somebody from disaster, but
Right.
I'm taking people who are at least in a good, if not in a great situation. Most
Right.
conversations I have in a day are with people that are worth millions and millions of dollars. And it's like, how do I take that and put them in a better situation? How do I maximize their gains? How do I minimize their taxes? How do I give them, return for years potentially if they're, for seller finance type of thing? I have a property I'm meeting at the end of the month where the seller, his suggestion, not mine, he's really thinking about leaving 90% of the proceeds of a $6.5 million property in the property as a mortgage. He's going to be the bank the whole time. The reasons for that is he's going to pay almost no taxes at sale. He's minimizing. He's literally paying like saving $1 million, more than $1 million in taxes at closing that he can then earn interest on. He's older. He doesn't want to deal with it anymore. It's already in a trust. So the money, the interest will just come right back into the trust. I'm putting money in the property. As soon as I buy it, I'm taking it off a septic, putting it up to the city sewer, doing some other improvements for it. He knows I'm invested in this. I'm local. I have the energy. He's moved to Florida. And so there's ways you can really help sellers. And I'm not looking for a discount at all. I'm looking to pay full price for that value for that property. And he's going to get he's going to solve not just getting full value, but solve other problems he has as well. And not problems, but going to get additional benefits that he
Wow.
wouldn't get just selling it like on the open market and saying, okay, here's my cash.
Man, that's awesome. Guys, this has been awesome. Thank you for joining us in the Real Estate Power Play podcast. If you want to get a hold of us, you know where to find us on the different chat groups and Facebook, social media, Instagram, YouTube. Also, if you want to get a hold of me directly, just follow me on Facebook. I'm all over the place. Just message me through there. And that's it. See you guys later. Peace.